I'll never forget the day Karen Wilson, the self-declared HOA watchdog of our neighborhood, finally crossed the line. I was in my front yard adjusting my sprinkler system when a shrill scream pierced the air, sending a chill down my spine. "Help! Call 911, he's threatening me." There was no mistaking that voice. It was Karen, the same woman who had been making my life miserable since I moved into Oakwood Estates 3 months ago. Frozen in place, rake in hand, I heard the approaching wail of police sirens. Within moments, 3 squad cars skidded too. A stop in front of my house, and officers jumped out, hands hovering near their weapons. "Drop the tool and step back," one of them ordered, while another cautiously advanced toward me. Startled and confused, I gently set the rake down and raised my hands. Across the street, Karen stood in her pristine garden, frantically pointing at me, her face twisted in an exaggerated mask of fear. "That's him," she screamed. "He came at me with that thing." The officers closed in, and I could feel my heart pounding. I hadn't done anything wrong. I was simply doing yard work on my own property. How had something so mundane spiraled into this madness? As one officer reached me, I spoke as steadily as I could despite my nerves. "Officer, I don't know what she's talking about. I've been out here working on my sprinklers all afternoon. I never even left my yard." I could see doubt in his eyes, that familiar, uncomfortable suspicion I'd faced before as a black man accused by a white woman in a suburban neighborhood. Then something unexpected happened. My next-door neighbor, Mrs. Rodriguez, stepped out of her home holding her phone. "Officers, I saw the whole thing from my window," she said firmly. "He's been in his yard the entire time." I started recording when I noticed Karen heading over to bother him again. The officers gathered around her phone, and I watched their expressions shift from concern to confusion, then to visible irritation. Karen must have sensed the change in atmosphere because she suddenly ramped up her theatrics. "He did threaten me. And he's breaking at least 3 HOA landscaping rules. You can check for yourselves," she yelled, her pitch rising dramatically. Ever since I'd moved in, Karen had made it clear we wouldn't be getting along, and that day made it painfully obvious just how far she was willing to go. As president of the Homeowners Association, Karen approached her duties with an almost obsessive fervor. Within my first week living in the neighborhood, I received my first violation notice, taped neatly to my door. The issue? Moving boxes visible through the garage windows, which she claimed counted as improper storage. 3 days later, while I was away on a week-long business trip, I got another warning, this time for my grass exceeding the allowed height by a 1/4 inch. By the 3rd week, Karen was pacing along my property line with a tape measure, telling me my rose bushes extended 2 inches beyond the allowable garden boundary as per Section 4, Paragraph 12 of the HOA handbook. I tried to be cooperative. I went to the HOA meetings, listened to her complaints, and even revised several of my home improvement plans to meet the community's aesthetic standards. But nothing I did seemed to satisfy her. The more I complied, the more infractions she uncovered. And it wasn't just me. Other neighbors muttered about her tyranny in hushed tones, but few dared to challenge her directly. Her husband, a well-known local lawyer, was often invoked when she reminded people of the potential legal risks of violating HOA rules. Things escalated quickly after I installed drought-resistant landscaping in my front yard, something I had cleared with the architectural committee beforehand. Karen objected to the color of the decorative rocks I had selected, claiming they clashed with the neighborhood's visual harmony. When I showed her the approval paperwork, she stormed off muttering about loopholes and the committee's incompetence. Soon after, she began photographing my yard from every possible angle. One day, she even parked across the street and started monitoring me while I worked outside. When I waved to her, she sped off. Then came a flurry of anonymous complaints, allegations of late-night disturbances, though I rarely stayed up past 10 p.m. My trash cans were mysteriously moved out of place, triggering more violation notices. Once, I came home to find a citation over an unauthorized vehicle because my cousin had briefly parked his work truck in front of my house. The pattern was obvious, but without direct proof. All I could do was keep contesting the notices at the monthly meetings. During one particularly tense gathering, I finally spoke out, questioning the uneven enforcement of rules. To my surprise, others joined in, sharing their own run-ins with Karen. She sat at the front table, visibly reddening as more voices chimed in. Abruptly, she ended the meeting early, citing procedural limits. That's when I realized I'd become her main target. The very next morning at 7 a.m., Karen was outside my house, measuring the height of my new mailbox with a level and tape. Measure. That was the breaking point. I started documenting everything. I installed security cameras around my property, logged every interaction, and kept my phone ready to record any encounter. My efforts didn't go unnoticed. Slowly, others began following suit. At first, it was just silent nods of support when Karen passed by, clipboard in hand. But it soon became something more. Mrs. Rodriguez next door brought cookies and tipped me off whenever Karen was on the move. Mr. Jenkins across the street shared a thick folder of Karen-related incidents going back 3 years. That infamous afternoon, I was simply making an approved adjustment to my sprinkler system when I noticed Karen watching from her window, phone in hand. I turned on my own phone's video recorder and positioned it to capture what I suspected was about to unfold. She marched over with a strained smile. "Excuse me," she said, her tone overly sweet but edged with hostility. "Those sprinkler heads are non-compliant. The HOA only allows Rainbird Pro Series heads with a brass finish," Karen snapped. I inhaled slowly, keeping my tone even. "Actually, Karen, these are the exact ones recommended in the HOA's landscaping guide. I have the documentation inside if you'd like to verify." Her face twisted in anger as if I'd insulted her. "Don't take that tone with me. I know those rules backwards and forwards, and you're in violation. This is your last warning before we escalate to fines, or even a lien." Though my patience was wearing thin, I kept my composure. "Karen, I followed the regulations to the letter. Every change I've made has been approved by the architectural committee. What more do you want?" She stepped closer, thrusting her finger toward me without making contact. "What I want," she hissed, "is for you people to realize that this neighborhood has standards that were here long before you moved in." There it was, the thinly veiled insult I'd been bracing for. The familiar weight settled in my stomach, but I kept my face calm. "I'm fully aware of the community standards, Karen. I'm also well aware of harassment and discrimination. Unless you can cite a specific violation by section and paragraph, I'm going to continue with my yard work." With that, I turned back to my sprinklers, dismissing her entirely. For a moment, there was silence. Then, without warning, Karen let out a loud gasp, spun around dramatically, and sprinted back toward her house with her phone pressed to her ear. "Help! 911. He's threatening me. He has a weapon," she shrieked, her voice cutting through the otherwise quiet street. I stood, their stunned rake still in hand, as several neighbors stepped out to witness the scene. Mrs. Rodriguez began recording immediately. Mr. Jenkins rushed over, already filming on his tablet. By the time the police arrived, at least 5 residents had captured the full incident from different angles. The officers reviewed Mrs. Rodriguez's video, and then more neighbors came forward with their recordings. The evidence was crystal clear. Karen had initiated the confrontation, made a racially charged comment, and then fabricated an emergency call when I refused to back down. As the officers watched the footage, their demeanor changed, from cautious to stern. A tall female officer approached Karen, her tone firm. "Ma'am, we need to discuss the 911 call you just made." Karen, now fully in character, launched into her story. "He threatened me. I feared for my life. He was holding that rake like a weapon." The officer raised a hand, cutting her off. "We've reviewed several unedited videos of the entire exchange. At no point did this man threaten or approach you. In fact, you crossed into his yard, initiated the confrontation, and made a false emergency report." Karen's face drained of color. "Those videos were edited. They don't show everything." "I know my rights," she said, her voice rising in panic. She looked around but found no sympathetic faces. The officer let out a tired sigh. "Ma'am, please turn around and place your hands behind your back." Karen's eyes went wide in genuine disbelief. "You can't be serious," she exclaimed. The officer remained calm and professional. "Karen Wilson, you are under arrest for filing a false police report, misuse of emergency services, and providing false statements to law enforcement." The entire neighborhood fell into stunned silence as the officer read Karen her rights and secured her in handcuffs. Her expression cycled between shock, indignation, and finally, fear. "This is a mistake," she shouted, struggling against the reality of the moment. "Do you know who my husband is? He's an attorney. You'll all regret this." I stood frozen in my yard, rake still in hand, barely able to comprehend how the situation had escalated so quickly. Neighbors began approaching, offering words of support, and crucially more video evidence to assist the officers. 3 weeks later, I found myself sitting in a courtroom as the judge prepared to issue his ruling. The prosecution presented an airtight case, video footage from several neighbors, a history of prior incidents, and testimony confirming Karen's long pattern of harassment. Her lawyer, notably not her husband, who was absent throughout the proceedings, tried to argue that she genuinely feared for her safety. But the mountain of evidence left little room for doubt. "Mrs. Wilson," the judge began sternly, peering over his glasses, This court views the abuse of emergency services as a serious matter. False reports waste public resources and put lives at risk. Based on the overwhelming evidence, I find you guilty on all charges. The room stayed silent as the sentence was delivered. You are hereby sentenced to 6 months of probation, a $5,000 fine for misuse of emergency services, and 200 hours of community service at the County Crisis Center. Karen gasped audibly, her polished demeanor finally cracking. In addition, the judge continued, you are responsible for all court fees and emergency response costs, totaling approximately $3,700. He glanced down at his notes before looking up again. Lastly, the court grants the restraining order filed by Mr. Taylor. You are to remain at least 100 feet away from him at all times, with no direct or indirect contact. Karen's face collapsed under the weight of it all. She leaned toward her attorney, whispering in desperation, but he only shook his head grimly as the judge listed the conditions of her probation. Just then, I noticed a new email notification on my phone. It was from the HOA board announcing an emergency meeting to address concerns about recent leadership conduct. By the time I left the courthouse, I had received 3 more emails, each from different board members expressing regret, support, and apologies for not intervening sooner. The final message came from the association's vice president asking if I would consider running for HOA president in the upcoming special election. As I glanced back at Karen, now flanked by the few remaining supporters she had left, I couldn't help but smile at the irony. Her self-made empire was crumbling, and in its place something better might finally take root.